Good afternoon, everyone. So I feel like my presentation is a bit of a wild card. So I'm actually going to focus on participation and what that means, and looking at alternative research methods or community engagement methods. So I'm kind of going to partly read and partly talk to try and keep myself within time. So in recent years, participatory research practices and communication have been popularised as a mean to achieve win-win outcomes for all. Over the last few days, we've discussed issues between local and descendant communities and heritage sites, etc., and the need to get buy-in from communities if heritage sites are to be valued, meaningful and protected or maintained. While ethically and in theory, participatory approach to community engagement has much to commend it, there's a lot of complexities and difficulties that also need to be considered. And also we need to just think a bit about what is participation, because we've heard the term a lot today and actually throughout the week, but there's many different types of participation. So I'm going to draw on my experiences as a researcher and an NPO worker to consider these complexities. And I'll be using examples from my time with the Khomani Bushmen and to a lesser degree the Kuil and Khwe at Platfontein. So I'm going to draw on some participatory communication as well to discuss examples of participation. So just to start, here is a map. I think we all know where we are in Kimberley and that the Platfontein Bushmen live there. And the other red circle you'll see above Uppington is where the Khomani live. And that big part in green is the Kgalagadi Transfrontier Park. The Bushmen live about 60 kilometres outside that. So to put it in context, to drive up to where that red circle is, it's about 67 hours from here in the car. Okay, so this timeline, I'm not going to spend much time on this, but it's just to give you an idea of the longevity of my work with the communities, because it's relevant when you're using participatory approaches, because the better you know your community, the better you understand their context and what might be important to them and what issues might arise and how you have to plan around that. And also it helps you design what methods you're going to use for your research or your engagement, whatever type it is. So I've got a few slides on participation. As I say, we've kind of been using the term loosely, I would suggest. So this is the first one. So you will see at the bottom, actually, it's not really participation at all. The bottom two rungs really they might involve engagement with community members to educate them or to educate them in a particular manner and push them towards a certain goal or viewpoint. The next two, that would be 4 and 5. That's not really it looks good from the outside, but it's not really very participatory at all. And it doesn't accomplish anything meaningful for participants. And the higher rungs are participatory. They involve more power and influence and decision making. So, but that's all a bit abstract. The next one is a bit more specific. And actually, I like this one. These are not new. I mean, the ladder we've just looked at was formulated in 1969. This one is 1995. So these come from participatory communication literature. So you'll see that the bottom two are more participatory, but actually you see less of that, and that's because it's quite hard to implement. I've seen a lot more of the top 5, but really, when you look at the first ones, they're the manipulative participation, passive participation, participation by consultation. These aren't really participation. They're kind of like going through the motions, paying lip service as you like. Likewise, participation for material incentives. You also see a lot of that, especially I think when you work in NGO work. Functional participation, where external agencies encourage participation to meet predetermined objectives. That's also very common. So I just want you to think about this when you're talking about participation and you're talking about your community engagement and how participatory are you really? And later on, we'll talk about some of the difficulties with participation. So this is just, this was at Platfontein, this is in Wildebeest, Kuil. So we did, when I say we, I'm part of the Rethinking Indigeneity project, which is now housed at University of Johannesburg, and a lot of these projects were done as part of that. They're always done on a budget as well. But so we did body mapping and grassroots comics workshops with the Kuil and Khwe and the Khomani, and we did them for 2 consecutive years. They're regarded as participatory research methods. They aim to be fun, but also to give something back. So they're less extractive than just doing interviews where the person has to just sit and give you all their information. Body mapping techniques were used to enable community to, in this case, we used it to help the community identify personal goals that they wanted to achieve in the next 5 and 10 years, and also community goals. We did, as I say, we did it in 2 years. And when we went back the second years, and the second year we did it, we went back and asked some of the people from the first year, you know, did you manage to achieve, how have you got on with achieving your goals? But the reality was that they hadn't actually been back and looked at their maps, which they'd taken home with them, or even thought about their goals since we left. So either they needed more support, or maybe they needed more, maybe if they'd been more involved in the initial planning of the process, it might have helped. But they did still enjoy it, to the extent that we realised some people had come 2 years in a row. So yeah, so that's just, you could do, so you can adapt these body mapping. There's quite a lot of literature on body mapping as well, and you can adapt them. As I say, we were looking at individual goals, but you could adapt them to various heritage needs, or just as a way maybe to try and engage people with rock art, etc. We also did it in the Kalahari. And specifically, actually, we chose this method because we're aware that a lot of especially the older people in the Kalahari, can't read and write. So we wanted to use a method that could include people who had difficulties with literacy. So yeah, and also in the Kalahari, a lot of people, especially the crafters, like to draw and paint. So that was another incentive to use this. Initially, the first time we did it in the Kalahari, we got people to participate and we got them all in the room. But what happened was the initial facilitator was a young guy from KZN, and the Khomani were just sitting there, not saying anything, not doing anything. And we realised something wasn't working. So we actually swapped over and replaced him with a female facilitator, and everything worked fine. So these are the things you've got to be aware of when you're sort of doing these methods. Like if something doesn't work, you've got to be able to just sort of adapt on the spot, you know, rather than just trying to push through. Because if you keep trying to push through, you're not really going to get proper participation. So this is the grassroots comics. Again, we did them 2 years in a row. So for this, the idea is that the community members split up into groups, and they've got to identify problems within the community, and they've got to express that in a picture, and at the end they've got to come up with a solution. So this one was, you know, the guy's got TB and he's sitting drinking and he's not caring, and he's getting sicker, you know, and then look, he's skin and bone in this one, and then eventually his friend gets him in the ambulance and gets him to hospital because he didn't want to go to the clinic. After they do these, they get hung up around the community as a way of health communication, but it doesn't need to be about health, and that's just what we did it on. We also did photo voice workshops. We only did them with the Kuil and Khwe just because of financial issues. Again, they're participatory in nature. You're probably all familiar with this because I would assume you've all gone and looked at the exhibition that was on here. At the time, the Research and Rethinking Indigeneity project was arranging a conference in Johannesburg, and we wanted to include some of the Bushmen from Platfontein, but we also wanted to give them something to be able to present and also to be able to interact about, because quite often you see you go to conferences and some Bushmen have been invited and they just sit in the corner and they find it quite difficult to interact or have conversations. So we thought by doing this, it meant there was something in common they could, you know, talk to researchers about. So yeah, so we did that, and because the funding was for research and the funding was for education and language, it meant the photo voice workshops were limited to that. If we'd been truly participatory, we would have let them choose the themes. But because with financial constraints, we couldn't. It's just another one of the photo voice workshops. Right. So this is pictures of the Bushman Council office. So I spent about 3.5 years here working in the office with the community. We were implementing various projects with quite a lot of funding. So I had been studying participatory methods, and I went up here and thought, right, we're going to do participatory development. So spoke to the funders, and at first they were kind of, yeah, let's try it. But over time, it became clear that they were just paying lip service to what I wanted to do. So they put some Bushmen on the steering committee, but really they weren't listening to them. So you would have the meeting, and I would have to say, you know, does so-and-so want to say anything? Because if I didn't ask the Bushmen if they wanted to comment, then the funders wouldn't. Even when they commented, at the end of the day, the funders would just make the decisions they wanted to make. But towards the end, actually, I said to one of the Bushmen, why don't you speak more? Why don't you put your point of view across? And he said something along the lines of, well, what's the point? Because they do what they want anyway. And he was right. So not much participation in that project. The next one is more participatory. Yep. So this is as part of a project to make films with the Khomani. They scripted, directed, filmed. Only thing they didn't do, well, they helped with, but they didn't completely do, was the editing of the film. So it was 8 short films. That was the subject matters of each film. So after the money was secured, the African Safari Foundation, which was the NGO involved, went up to speak to the leaders at the Khomani and said, you know, we've got money to make these films. And the leadership chose the 8 subject matters. And then we went up and made the films with the participants. So it was quite participatory in the sense that, I mean, they did the whole scripts. It was their stories to tell, because the idea was that they were going to tell stories instead of other people telling stories about them. The only thing I often wonder about was, you know, would it have been better if the actual filmmakers themselves chose the subject matter or not? But to be honest, they didn't really seem that bothered. That's the group that made the films. It says making the films. And the films are all available on YouTube. They're in Afrikaans with quite bad English subtitles, which we're paid a lot of money for, I understand. So right, moving on. I'm going to kind of pull it together at the end. But so the Twee Riverian Interpretation Centre in the Kalahari Park. So the Khomani Cultural Landscape was declared a World Heritage Site in 2017. And I was involved. I was on the advisory board for this project, and so was David Morris. It's quite a big advisory board. The consultants working on the project for the Interpretation Centre were Eco Africa, and they worked alongside San Parks. You can see also the funders there at the bottom. So the community were involved to an extent on this. So the Interpretation Centre was something that community had wanted for a long time, not necessarily in the park, but they'd always been asking about it, and we'd talked to various people about setting one up, but it just never happened until after the World Heritage Site was proclaimed. The Sandparks appointed Eco Africa as the consultants. They had also been the consultants involved in preparing the dossier for the World Heritage Site, so they were already known to some of the community members. As part of the project, there was Khomani involved, and various narratives were sent round and read by academics and NGO workers and the Khomani, and the Khomani also put their ideas forward. So the Khomani who were involved were very much consulted and were very much involved. However, the only thing I always thought about, and I never ever found out, was why were they particular people chosen? I'm not saying they were the wrong people, but why them and why not other people? The community themselves, while the project was going on, they actually didn't know that it was going on. And at one time when I was up there was meant to be a community meeting, and it was tasked to be arranged by a community member, and he didn't arrange it. But that morning he sent an invite out to people to come to his community meeting. So there was hardly anybody at the meeting. But But so there would have been two options. You could have postponed the meeting to get more community members there so you could discuss it properly, or you can just move on with what's there and say, well, at least you tried to include the community. And that's what the organisers decided to do. They just had very few input. They said, well, you know, we've done our best. I wondered, had they really done their best? And they moved on. But I have to say, I mean, that's a picture of the interpretation centre. We went for low. We didn't use any fancy. It's just boards, and there's one video, and that was purposeful because we thought if we make anything too fancy, then it's just going to be difficult to maintain. So there's one of the community members there with me. A lot of the community members haven't seen it. It's 60 kilometres away from the community. There was an opening, but that was mainly for, some people were invited, but the opening was mainly for government. So the broader community were invited, and they as I say, a lot of them haven't been. But the people who have been do like it, and I haven't actually heard anybody complain about the fact they weren't involved in it. So yeah, it's gone down quite well. So things to consider. And this is a complicated thing, but participation, and this is something that quite often comes back. People ask questions about. So who gets to participate? So quite often when people run projects or researchers go up, they get referrals maybe from NGOs or from various people. But that means you very often get the same information all the time, especially if it's NGOs, because a lot of people who work for NGOs have NGO speak as well up there, like they know what they're meant to say. Sometimes the leadership give you referrals. In fact, the South African San Council, if you work through them, they tell you who you can talk to, and they tell you not to talk to anyone else. So that itself is hugely problematic. What influence does this have? Again, as I say, you always get, a lot of the time you get the same story. Some people's opinions are given priority or considered more than others if you keep engaging with the same people. Also creates jealousy within the community. As some people seem to, some people perceive that certain people are being chosen all the time. Why do people participate and others not? That's really difficult, and it depends from community to community. And that's why it's important to know your community. Sometimes it can just be travel difficulties. Sometimes it's language difficulties. It can be more difficult if it's confidence or education, because if it's language difficulties, maybe you can get a translator. If it's travel difficulties, you can transport them. But confidence is a big issue, and it's a big issue with the Khomani. Again, also the thing about being able to participate, there's a lot of jealousy. And another thing you must remember, some people don't participate or are not invited to participate, and I do this as well. So there's a lot of people with substance abuse issues, and quite often you're asked to send somebody down to Cape Town for something, or Kimberley or whatever, and it's really difficult because the substance abuse issue, it's not just actually for the impact they'll have on the project, but it's also themselves. Because if you send somebody who's going to go to Joburg and start wandering around, it's not like wandering around the Kalahari. Something could happen to them. And it's happened before. People have kind of gone missing. So that's another reason that certain people don't get to participate. And it's unfortunate because some of these people have got really great ideas, but the substance abuse issue is just too much of a concern. What can you do to encourage participation? Again, you need to know your community, and it depends why they're not participating in the first place. Going back to, the body mapping workshop, we chose a method that people who weren't literate could participate in, and that was purposeful. So you have to be thinking about things like that. Sometimes you get the same people participating all the time, as I say, with the workshops at Platfontein, with the same people come along. Sometimes they do that because they want their voices heard, or maybe because they're leaders, or because they've got more confidence than other people. Sometimes I remember my supervisor, Alan Bernard, told me when I first went up to the community, he said, remember that you might get someone approach you who wants to talk to you all the time, but it doesn't actually mean he's worth listening to. You've got to talk to other people. So yeah, I always remember that. And you also get people out, and this happens a lot in the Kalahari, people complain all the time about not being personally invited. They say they didn't know about the opportunity. So what we did when we worked in the office, actually, we always put notices up and spread word of mouth. And the idea was that you know, if people really want to be involved in these projects, they must then think about, you know, taking responsibility and checking the notice board. But you always get people complaining, and some people don't choose not to participate. So for instance, if there's community meetings, I'll say to people, you go into the community meeting, they say, no, I'm not going to bother. And then afterwards they complain about what happened. And I'll say, well, why didn't you? Maybe you should have gone to the meeting. And it's the same with CPA elections. They don't vote for the leadership, but then when they don't like the leadership, they complain about it. So it's difficult to find ways around all these. But let me quickly, because I'm running out of time. I was actually going to speak about Wildebeest Kuil, but I'm not going to say much about it. But what I am going to say is, so I've been going to Wildebeest Kuil since 2006. We held workshops there. You know, I usually go when I'm in the Kalahari, when I'm in Kimberley, and I know about all the, you know, there's been a lot of vandalism over the years. There's been a lot of money spent on it. It doesn't make much money, although some community members think it's making a lot of money. But what I would say is that, you know, when trying to engage with community leaders, you have to think about some of the points I've just made before, but also that, see, when you have a community in flux or a community in conflict or community leadership that's not functioning well and bad relationship between the community leadership and the community, it's actually really hard to get things to work. Even if you use participation, it can help, but there is a bit of a brick wall, and maybe you just have to wait until things with the community changes or things with the leadership change. I know that's not a great answer, but right, I can hear the alarms going. Right, my last slide. I changed up. Right, it's not really a conclusion. It was more things to think about. I had changed it to. So participation is very time consuming. That's the reality. Participants only truly participate if they perceive the process as beneficial for themselves. So they might come along to a workshop if you're offering lunch, but they're not really going to participate unless they're really interested. Participants must be empowered to participate. Now that's really difficult, especially if in the Kalahari a lot of people don't like speaking out, they don't like speaking to people they don't know, etc. And I think that's something that has to take time and maybe education to improve. Practices need to be culturally, community and group specific. And again, that brings me back to that example I gave you about literacy and using methods that fit your community. It's difficult for funders to measure if you're trying to build participatory confidence, you might want to look for funding that helps you work on that. But funders don't really like funding things about processes, so they probably are not going to fund you. If they're funding another project, like the project I worked on, and even if they agreed to use participatory methods, again, it takes time and they don't have that time. They want to move on. So it's also unlikely that participation will result in consensus. And that's an issue with a lot of the Bushman communities, because they don't want just their leaders to make decisions. They want the leaders actually to check in with them and get consensus on everything. And no matter how much participation you do, I think it's really difficult. It might help towards consensus, but I don't think you'll get that. And lastly, true participation is really difficult. And this was spoken about earlier, and maybe even too idealistic. So I would suggest that it's probably not really going to happen, but that shouldn't still stop you from trying to be more participatory in the true sense of the word, not just going through the motions. And I hope I've given you some ideas about different ways to do your research. And I probably ran over, so I better be quiet now.
Thank you very much. Is there any question?
Julie, thank you very much for that. Something which I suppose want your ideas, and something which has always kind of sat a bit uncomfortably with me in terms of participation in this kind of community participation. And I somehow missed who you said was doing the World Heritage dossier, but I assume they've been paid huge amounts to write that up. And as researchers, we are paid in our jobs, and this is part of our job. So we are making money. But often in these circumstances, and I've been in quite a few of these meetings, the people who are involved are expected to give their time freely and to come to these meetings. And the assumption is that they are getting something out of it when they're often not. And as you say, often their ideas are not taken into account. And to me, it's something that keeps going through my mind. I don't see a way out of it, because paying people can create all sorts of other problems. But I'm just wondering about your thoughts on that.
So some of the projects people were paid to take part in, others not. So as far as I'm aware, the Interpretation Centre, the Bushmen that were involved, but David might be able to confirm this, I think they possibly got paid. We've also been involved in other projects, like I didn't talk about here, the Mashishin project, where people were paid, where Bushmen were paid the minimum rate. Because it's, and I agree, once you start paying people for maybe just attending meetings, it's different. The Mashishin project, they were paid as a, and also the Beji project, because they were taking part and they were sort of viewed as participants and authors, so it was a bit more formalised. But yeah, and it is an issue. When I worked for the NGO, I mean, that's kind of one of the reasons eventually I didn't renew my contract. And it's not just about the Bushmen that won the steering committee, I think, got a stipend, I can't remember now, but it would have been minimal. So even if they do get paid, when you look at what the project managers are getting paid, and even our project managers, they were staying at the Plaatje in Uppington, and I said to them, I don't think that's appropriate. There's a perfectly good guest house around the corner, so they changed to start staying there. But they still spend copious amounts of money on car hire and all these things that I worked in the office with the Bushmen, and we would spend money, but we were very, we didn't spend that. Even if we went to town to stay over, we stayed in cheap places. But no, it's, and as you say, once you start also paying, then it becomes this expectation, and then people come to take part because they want your money and they're not really participating. So no, it's really difficult. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm just following up on what Karen was asking, and to make a comment. I went to Tanzania a few months ago, and I happened to then end up attending a community consultation meeting. And it was a cultural shock for me, because the meeting went on and on and on, then it ended. And then I saw people standing in the line when the meeting ended. And I wondered what was happening. They were actually being paid for having been there. But now the danger here is that as much as we are respecting these people for their time, people are coming there just for the cash payment. And I saw almost no participation, from people. And it was not a language factor, because the meeting was conducted in Swahili. So yeah, it becomes a big problem. And when I asked colleagues, I was told this is a norm in this country. It happens everywhere you go. The same applies across the border in Uganda. So you'll have people attending. You will say, I had 100 people at the meeting, but actually, the number doesn't mean anything. In my South African experience, I always felt that as long as, depending on how long I'm going to be with a particular set number of people, it has become standard to at least make sure that you provide food, you provide something to drink for the whole duration of the day. That's respectful, instead of sitting with somebody and you give them absolutely nothing. But the payment thing, as much as I can see the argument for it, at the moment I'm cold towards it. Thank you.
Can I just say that it's not just in relation to participation as well. Researchers will pay for interviews. And when I first went to the Kalahari, I was told that, so a lot of linguists had been working there, and apparently, I don't know if this is true or not, but I was told that linguists tend to pay for working with community members. So then the expectation is that you pay. I didn't pay, but it meant some people chose not to work with me, but that was fine because actually in a way it was a good thing because it meant that I had to go and find alternative people. So I was getting different information back rather than just speaking to the same people that everybody's speaking to. The South African Sand Council, I don't know if people are aware of them, they also like to insist that people get paid and get paid quite a lot. So, but yeah, it's a big issue.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I liked the references that you made to the different strata of participation, because they really remind us to see where we are. And we all have to admit, all of us who work with communities, it's never an easy job. It's a science on its own. It's a job on its own. I remember many times we go to some site and we try to talk about rock art, and it happened that week the community had no water, and they said to us, "No, we don't want to talk about rock art. We want water." And we had to postpone the meeting because, we had a schedule, but we had to then, look for water for the people so that our meeting can be held. And that took like 3 days because now too much negotiation. So these things happen. Just last week, we had another situation where we were doing a community consultation. Remember those 45 people who died in Botswana in a bus accident last year? Because in that community, we are just completing the building of a museum. And we thought, well, maybe we should do a memorial in that space for them. And we thought, well, let's contact the community. When we got there, we didn't even know that there were other problems that had nothing to do with us as the museum. But the bereaved families were waiting for the government, any government department, to come and try to talk, because they were having frustrations that actually had nothing to do with the Botswana government, but everything about the road accident processes of claiming from South Africa. But they were ready for us, and we tried to talk about how they said, no. Eventually we thought, okay, let's not even talk about this. Let's find something to do in that space, while they're healing. We have an idea what we wanted to do, but the consultation could not happen because of other problems. And that happens to all of us, to be expecting that on the field, But thank you very much.
Right, thank you for your presentation. I just have a quick question on the two activities, the film and the body making art. I just want to find out what was your approach in identifying that as a need for that society, or yes, what informed you to facilitate, to train them on that, and then also what was their outcome? How did they appreciate that?
For the body mapping, that was to do with actually when I did my PhD. It wasn't actually part of my PhD research, but I was there for a year, and the longer I was there, I started realizing that people didn't really seem to have goals or desires or dreams even, because I would sort of say, if you could do anything, what would you want to do? Or to kids, what do you want to do when you're older? And, I don't know. So that was the idea behind the body map, and it might sort of just get people thinking about maybe what do they want and what could they want, what could they do. So that was it. But as I say, the outcome, we were based at University of KwaZulu-Natal at that point, and we used to come up every year and bring some students up. And so we did the project, and then, as I say, I think what really they would have needed was somebody to be there maybe for another 8 weeks or so, at least, to meet every week and to talk about the goals and what progress they were making. But the reality was we weren't there, so the body maps lay in people's cupboards and were never looked at again. We actually did a proposal for another body mapping, and this time we sort of built in to train people from the community and then get them together every week, but we never got the funding. But that being said, in the Kalahari, we did a different project. It was to do with addictions, and we set up a group that was to meet every week and discuss things, and they just didn't bother unless you were driving around picking people up. So motivation is quite difficult. Again, it's kind of something that has to come from within as well. And when you've got communities, the communities are quite despondent. The other thing you asked about the filmmaking, again, that was a decision made by the NGO. I think they were offered money from lottery. And again, they were aware that there's a lot of information out there about Bushmen, but not the Bushmen putting information out there themselves. So they thought it would be a good opportunity. And as I say, it was actually, yeah, because even some of the decisions they were making, we didn't particularly agree with. Like, I don't know if I should tell you this, but they wanted they wanted to do this thing where they were pretending to crack open an ostrich egg and cook the egg on a hot stone. So we facilitated that for them, but apparently when we spoke to the elders said that would never happen. But basically, you know, it was a film, so you cook it and then you put it on the stone. So myself and the other filmmaker, you know, we did discuss whether we should let that go ahead or not. But at the end of the day, we decided it was their films. And if that was what they wanted to do, then go ahead with it. So, yep.
Yeah, I'll do quick. Okay, just would like to have your thoughts on something. So to me, maximizing participation is always a good thing in a certain case, in a certain type of project, for example, the body mapping and things. But once we turn out to talk about project like touristic sites or making something touristic, you know, that involves the community, I wonder if always maximizing participation is a good thing, because participation depends on that thing, and that thing can easily collapse because, I mean, participation can be very vulnerable. So like a touristic site, for example, is very dependent on tourist arrivals. So there's external factors. So how can we, I mean, as practitioners here, how can we identify in a certain area the intensity of participation we're supposed to give, to allow, to permit regarding a certain project that depends on external factors as well? Do you understand what I mean?
I think, well, I'll start and you can come in. So I think, yeah, I think there's certain things where I would suggest there might be certain things where participation. So for instance, if you've got a rock art site and the community want to come and draw over it as part of participation, then you might want not to allow that. I don't know, because, you know, so there's times when participation can be problematic. I'm not sure I answered properly, but I was thinking when you said, you know, about tourism, it's vulnerable, and I don't know if this is really your question though, and I'm thinking about that, and I think that the issue is what Tembe was talking about is about managing expectations, because again, the Kalahari, they keep being told tourism's the answer to all their problems and they'll all get work, and that's never going to happen. So I think managing expectations, but also, and this is also really difficult, is if they buy into it, hopefully they will want to promote it and push it themselves. But what we don't really see that an awful lot. We do see we've got a couple of people in the Kalahari. There's one woman runs a business. Also, all the crafters they get up every morning and go and sell their crafts. But it has to come from within. And even coming back to, you know, I was talking about the filmmaking, we left cameras up there so they could continue with their filmmaking. The idea was they could maybe film weddings, or because they always want to film weddings or things like that. But the reality is the cameras lie in a cupboard and have done since the project finished and never used. So I think for anything with participation, the real trouble we have in the Kalahari is the motivation of the community. And I think part of it is because it's not their projects, but even when it's things they really like, that there's just, I think sometimes there's just so much to do, like they were talking about the water, like they don't have water at the moment in the Kalahari. So there's a lot of things get in their way, but also I think there are a lot of the stage of what's the point about everything actually, because they're 25 years since the land claim. They still don't have toilets, they still don't have electricity. And they've been to all these meetings and they've had all this training, they've had guide training, and then, as you say, they don't get any tourists because they don't have marketing experience, they don't know how to market, they don't have electricity to have computers, they don't have money to have internet data, all these sort of things, so then they just get fed up. I don't know if I've really answered you.